The Twins appear to have honed in on 4 finalists for their managerial job. We're about to break them all down, so get strapped in and get ready to get locked on Twins.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello again, and welcome back to Locked On Twins. I'm your host, Brandon Warne, and I have been covering the Twins for 15 years and watching them for about twice that long. And I appreciate you making Locked On Twins your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And of course, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network for your team every day. We love to hear from you if you are an everydayer, even if you're not an everydayer. In the comment section, the chat, we have a poll in the YouTube, excuse me, on the YouTube screen there for who your preferred finalist is for manager. As it appears, we're down to 4 finalists. So we'll talk about that here very briefly. But yeah, in the comments, feel free to hang out, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a subscribe, wherever you are watching, listening, all that fun stuff. We love the interaction, and it's all quite great. So you can follow me on the tweets at Brandon_Warne or at Locked On Twins, and follow my written work on the Access Twins newsletter, as well as Daily Norseman. So today, in fact, during World Series Game 1 or thereabouts, we were made aware of 4 finalists for the Twins manager job. Dismissed Rocco Baldelli after the end of the season, and there's been a lot of chatter about Nick Punto, Ramon Vasquez, both of whom are not finalists. But in today's episode, we will get down to the nitty-gritty, let you know who the 4 finalists are, some pros, some cons. And if you've got comments too, please feel free to be active in the chat, because I would love to hear your thoughts too. So on today's show, we are talking about the 4 finalists as we know them from The Athletic, the intrepid Twins reporter Dan Hayes, and then national reporter Britt Giroli, reporting that these are all names we've heard. James Rowson, former Twins hitting coach. Derek Shelton, former Twins bench coach. Ryan Flaherty, who's a former utility infielder and the Cubs bench coach. And then finally, former Mariners manager Scott Servais. So I want to kind of get out in front of what I perceived to be some disappointment on the list, in that from my point of view, and now this is my point of view, and I'm not trying to denigrate anybody else's, none of these candidates to me are inherently disappointing. There's a lot of people trying to say, oh, of course they'd go this route or that route. This is a pretty wide net to cast in a number of ways that I'll get to here in a moment. But there's also they're guys that have been here before, they're retreads. No, not particularly. They both went on to bigger and better things after the Twins. You can pick apart how things went for them, where they went, if you choose. But I think each of them brings a unique aspect to the search, and not necessarily fits or fills a specific role in the managerial job, but gives the Twins 4 unique candidates to consider. And again, we had seen, that Ramon Vasquez had been told he was no longer a candidate. Nick Punto, not a candidate. And I believe I saw one other name, but it's escaping me right now. Nevertheless, so the 4 we're talking about: former Twins hitting coach, James Rowson; Derek Shelton, who has managed the Pittsburgh Pirates and then was a coach in multiple organizations; Ryan Flaherty, utility infielder with the Orioles, Braves, and Cleveland. He's got a backstory with Vanderbilt, some fun stuff there. So we will we'll discuss that as well. And then Scott Servais, who was fired mid-season from a Mariners team that just missed out on going to the World Series. So before we get to all that, and before I forget about it, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the app today. And again, reminder, I see some of you hanging out in here. Feel free to leave comments, questions. I would very much love to hear from you all and your opinions too. So we did, excuse me, a managerial draft probably about two and a half weeks ago. And my number one pick, James Rowson, is on the list. Derek Shelton, Dave's number one pick on the list. And then I don't remember. I think we both had kind of discussed Scott Servais as an option, Flaherty as an option, but neither had really honed in on him as a draft pick. Let's just kind of do the tail of the tape with each of them and go from there. James Rowson, 49 years old, was the offensive or the hitting coach for the Yankees this past season. He's got a long history with the Yankees as a player. He was in the minors with the Yankees, the Mariners, and then did a lot of he was a minor league hitting coach with the Cubs, a minor league hitting coordinator with the Yankees, excuse me, Twins hitting coach from 2017 to 2019. And then when he left the Twins, he kind of took this unique hybrid role as a bench coach / offensive coordinator. And I think it was more along the lines of like assistant to the manager at the time. And basically it was so that it was a promotion for Rowson to leave as hitting coach for the Twins, because lateral moves are not considered all that usual or likely in the game. From the Rowson standpoint, I have extensive time covering him because that was the era I covered the Twins in person. And I felt like the communication, he was a wonderful communicator. And just it seemed to really ingratiate himself. I don't know if that's the right word, to players on an individual basis. Seemed as though his hitting philosophies are what helped them become the Bomba Squad in 2019. And well, I think it might be, or it definitely is unreasonable to expect the offense to do something like that again under Rowson. Again, it comes down to talent. I mean, if you want to compare David Popkins' 2025 Blue Jays to his 2024 Twins, there are differences more than just how the team performed. But anyway, with Rowson, what I like is, to me, hitting was the issue, like the biggest issue on the team this year. Now, you have to kind of parse that out as the first half issue. The second half issue was, everything. The Twins were bad at everything because they traded everybody. But in the first half, like timely hitting, I'm very careful with how I say situational hitting, but hitting in big spots, they just didn't do it. They flat out, straight up did not do it. And I think, does that mean you want an offensive, like a hitting-minded manager? I can see that being a line of thinking. I can see that being a strategy. I want to be cautious with overreacting to something like that, because in the business of sports, there's a lot of, you overreact one way and then you overreact the other way and you never settle in the middle. And that's, that's kind of where the happy place is the middle. So I think Rowson, it could help if he has, and I think he does have a good relationship with Byron Buxton. Not really anybody else left from back then, because 2019 is a long time ago in professional sports. But we're getting some company here. All in good fun on a live show, buddy. Anyway, this is great, isn't it? Okay, buddy, it's time to go. Oh, good. Anyway, James Rowson. So, where were we? I'm thinking though, like from a hitting standpoint, he can really revitalize this offense and turn them back to. They didn't have to be the Bomba Squad to be successful this year. They had to be simply decent, simply okay in those big spots. And we're probably not talking about a trade deadline where they traded everyone away. We're talking about a team that, maybe they only go 85 and 77 and they're in the mix at the end of the year. And we're talking about, should they or shouldn't they have fired the manager? Should they or shouldn't they have done all this stuff? That's not a great place to be either. But again, that just goes to show that that's how I think small the gap was on offense between a team that blew it up, and a team that could have at least been decent down the stretch. And who knows where the Twins land if the Tigers fade like they did. I mean, where does that play into how the Twins maybe turn their season around or anything like that? Let's do this. Let's regroup. When we come back, I'm going to discuss a little more about Rowson. We'll talk Derek Shelton, Ryan Flaherty, and a few other things, and see if any comments come through. But again, first we'll take a quick break here. Let's be real. Making excuses does not solve anything. We've all heard them before. It's just stress, I'm tired, or it just happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body needs just a little extra support, and that's where Rougiette comes in. We talk a lot about getting in on the action in some of our other ads, but this one's a little different. Rougiette offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED, designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rougiette makes it super easy to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor, 100% online, no awkward waiting rooms, no in-person appointments. And if you are prescribed, it is shipped directly and discreetly straight to your front door. The process is fast, simple, and private. Maybe that's the most important one of all. And it's all handled by real doctors. It's all about confidence, baby, connection, and getting back to those moments that matter. Visit Rougiette.com/LockedOnMLB to get 15% off your first order. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnMLB. And don't forget, use our code LockedOnMLB so they know that they know that we sent you. Rougiette, stop making excuses and start making moves. All right, now that we've fully regrouped from our little run in here, Locked On Twins, back for our second segment, we're discussing managerial finalists for the Twins: James Rowson, Derek Shelton, Ryan Flaherty, and Scott Servais, former Mariners manager. Actually managed the Mariners well into the 2024 season. 112 games, something like that. I think it was 62-62, and my math is so bad right now. 124 games. There we go. So not that long ago that Scott Servais was a manager in MLB, and a Wisconsin native besides. So we'll come back to that. I just want to reset, refocus. James Rowson, I've made no bones about it. That's my preferred candidate. I'll be straight up honest that I don't know enough about Ryan Flaherty or some more about Scott Servais just because of the role that he had with the Mariners, obviously being a manager. There's a lot more we know about his tendencies and that sort of thing. It's just that my personal preference would be James Rowson. That isn't to say that any of these options are, the Twins doing the wrong thing. I don't get that vibe from anybody I've talked to. There are people out there banging the drum. Oh, these are retreads, or they're going to be cheap, or they're going to be, yes men. All of that is just people saying stuff because they know it'll get people to agree with them and get them more attention. None of us really know that much about this, and the fan fiction that a lot of people create around this is, I guess not shocking, but certainly disappointing to say the least. J-Row would be my choice. I just, from the communication and observation I've had of him, what I perceive as the Twins' weakness, what I perceive as a way the Twins can improve that weakness, would be going that route. And so Rowson, to me, absolutely not a retread or, taking a cheap way out or an easy way out. James Rowson would be a legitimately good leader of men. And if that's my, it's such a nebulous thing. Like we can all have our must-haves and our do not wants. It's not entirely unlike dating, buying a house, buying a car. But at the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know. And so this is me kind of trying to say, based on what I know and not pretending I know more than I do, I think Rowson would be a tremendous candidate. With that said, Derek Shelton, I also think, would be a good candidate. 55 years old, managed the Pirates after leaving the Twins from 2020 until he was fired during the season in 2025. He's coached everywhere: hitting coach, quality control coach, bench coach, before manager. So lots of experience here. And my personal opinion, since he's not presently employed, which is also true for Scott Servais in terms of, being hired away from somewhere, Derek Shelton would also make a phenomenal bench coach if that was something he was willing to do for one of these candidates. Everything I've seen with Shelty, the players absolutely adore him. At least the Twins did back when he was bench coach here. Great baseball acumen. He is a former catcher, so might be something there. We'd like to do that a little bit. But at SIU, he studied criminal justice and poli-sci. So he has a background in laying down the law, I guess you could say. But from everything I had kind of gathered, he was definitely a favorite of players everywhere he's been, and everyone that has worked with him has great things to say with him. He was actually quite good on the radio, Sirius XM. He picked up and did some stuff this season, while he was still being paid by the Pirates to not manage the Pirates. Don Kelly taking over after him. But I just feel like Shelton is going to be branded unfairly as a bad manager because he had the team that had the fewest resources behind him, or some of the fewest, I guess. Because you can make a case for Colorado too, I suppose. But we shouldn't let his time in Pittsburgh cloud what he is capable of as manager of the Twins, or whatever else he does next. I saw someone make an interesting point. Was Joe Girardi a retread? Was Joe Torre a retread? Joe Torre had managed most recently the Cardinals and then took over the Yankees. And there was a fair amount of ink spilled about how the Yankees were doing the wrong thing and how it was going to be disastrous. And now the Torre managed Yankees are the ones that everyone yearns for when they get bounced in the first or second round of the playoffs here every year. So I think we have to be careful to overreact to how Shelton was treated and how he managed a situation that is quite different than Minnesota. Now, to be fair, from the outside, there might seem like there are some similarities. Bob Nutting, the owner of the Pirates, is considered notoriously cheap, and that's the hubbub, that's the chatter around the poll ads as well. So I guess you could make that connection. You could make the connection too that they both play in two of the most beautiful stadiums in baseball, and at the same time, you look at both of those jobs. I mean, Don Kelly's the manager of the Pirates now, but if they were both available, you would say, okay, well, I do see some similarities there. But the Pirates have never signed a Carlos Correa. They've never signed a Josh Donaldson. They've never, in the modern era. Maybe if you want to look back when a big contract was $3 or $4 million a year, that's different. But in the modern recent era, there have been far more things done by Twins ownership to build a winning team than there have Pirates. So it would be easy to make the low-hanging fruit joke of, they're basically the same. No, the Pirates have had far fewer resources than the Twins. And I also think, too, the Twins have, right now, the pitching infrastructure, the pitching prospects / young pitchers / just a couple big league guys in Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez, where outside of Paul Skeens, it never really came together behind him. Like, there were guys who popped up and had decent stretches, decent years, but it wasn't like, we're going to go Paul Skeens, Bubba Chandler, and then 3, 4, 5. It was more along the lines of there's Skeens and then really nothing else. And all the chatter of, they're going to trade Skeens or they're going to do this. All I'm saying, it's a long way of saying that Derek Shelton's opportunity to match the Twins would have to be considered, all things considered, a much more advantageous situation than managing the Pirates. So Yeah, so we got Rowson and Shelton, the two that we are all much more familiar with just by virtue of their time here. We're going to pause. We're going to take our last break for today. And then when we come back, we'll talk about Ryan Flaherty and Scott Servais and just kind of get a feel for what we think is going to happen, because there are some different inklings that may lead us down a certain path. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, I've seen put down 5, get 100, 150, 200, 250, but never, ever have I seen 300. And I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play, whether it's a same game parlay, live action, you name it, FanDuel has got it. Makes watching football even more exciting. You're already watching the action. Why not get a little action on the action? And whether you're a casual fan or if you're a stat freak like me, diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, we're rolling down the home stretch here, Locked On Twins. 4 finalists for Twins manager James Rowson, Derek Shelton, Ryan Flaherty, and Scott Servais. Ryan Flaherty we have not discussed yet, and frankly, is probably the candidate we know the least about, former utility infielder. And I think we find that a lot of managers over the years have been former catchers, utility infielders. Every now and then you'll get a pitcher. A lot of times it's not guys who were stars in baseball. Twins had Paul Molitor manage. Rocco Baldelli was on the path to being a star before he was waylaid by some health concerns. And so there's no one way. And I think, too, what's notable here, Flaherty is 39, Rowson is 49, Shelton is 55, Scott Servais is 58. So you're kind of looking across sorry, I can't get rid of this frog in my throat. You're kind of looking across a number of different areas of age, expertise, just what each of them brings to the table, where they're coming from, and probably where they're going. Flaherty, Cubs bench coach. We saw the Cubs in the postseason. 39. He's actually a couple months younger than I am, which is certainly quite humbling. Played at Vanderbilt with David Price and Pedro Alvarez. So a little context there. He was actually teammates with Alvarez on the Orioles, also played with the Braves, and then briefly with Cleveland. Then he jumped into scouting with the Padres, coached for the Padres for a bit, even managed for a bit when Bob Melvin entered the COVID protocols here 3-4 years ago. This was kind of funny. On Baseball Reference, the most comparable players were A-Ray Adrianza and Nico Goodrum. So a couple of fun little connections there. What else do we have here? So he's been on the coaching staff for the Cubs the last 2 years. As far as like what he brings to the table, I'm not super certain, other than I like the idea of players who kind of were grinders. Mike Redmond, getting the most out of their talent. And those guys are usually good at instruction. They're good at understanding adversity, which it's baseball. There's plenty of adversity. It's the name of the game. So do you want to go a younger guy who's good with that, an older guy who's good with that? And we've discussed that. I discussed it with Doug Mankiewicz on the last episode. Like, do you want a young guy who will grow with the players? Do you want an older guy who will kind of be, I don't mean like a fatherly figure, but that sort of like head of household, I don't know if that's what you want. And I think that, so you got Flaherty as kind of the young option, Servais as kind of the other end. And then the two guys you already know. I think they kind of touch all the bases that you would expect for a coaching / managerial search, with Flaherty being the young guy. And the Twins are going to be young, even if they were to keep Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan, and fingers crossed, knock on wood, they do exactly that. They're going to be young. There's going to be Alan Roden and Austin Martin and Luke Keeschel. And then that's before you consider Walker Jenkins, Emmanuel Rodriguez, anybody else. So it's going to be a young team. And there are differing schools of thought. How do you want to instruct? What kind of environment do you want to create around them? And so if they look all the way external, and granted, they're all external because they weren't with the Twins this last year, but if they look all the way external, then it kind of boils down to, Servais has been there before, Flaherty hasn't. How much does that matter to you? Servais, born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, 58 years old, former big league catcher. So again, might be something there. And he was fired in the middle of 2024. The Mariners were in a bit of a tailspin. And they were actually like 62-62. So they were 500 when he was fired. But, the Twins were just under 500. And then they traded everybody. And then it blew up. That sometimes it's less about the big picture and more about what's happening in that moment. The Twins were floundering. They still had 2 months to turn it around with their group this year. And then knowing what we know now about how the Tigers collapsed, maybe you do it differently. With Servais, I don't, you can't parse it out quite easily, but there's certainly some of his affect/effect with the current Mariners team that came within a game of the World Series. Vastly regarded as a leader, a good leader, managed over 1,300 games and won at a better than 500 mark for a Seattle organization that has been kind of down in the dumps. To be 500 and better with the Mariners is pretty good. They just have not had a lot of postseason success. And then this year they kind of flipped that script a bit. And there are people who are upset with the guy who took over for him, who happens to be Minnesotan, and Dan Wilson going to Bizardo instead of Munoz in the final game there. So all of that is to say that they've got the longtime manager with Servais, who had parts of 9 seasons managing the Mariners. I got to sit in on a couple of his pressers, seemed very polished, seemed very calm. He gave off a good managerial vibe of being able to handle every situation. And I think too, playing in the big leagues as long as he did, as a more of a defense first catcher, not a great bat. In fact, I was watching a Twins game. I've been talking about this a lot, but watching a Twins game from '97 where they were playing at Wrigley Field. It was the first time the Twins had ever played at Wrigley because interleague play was instituted that year, and Servais was behind the plate. It was actually one of the last games Harry Carey did because he passed away a few months later. And so it was Scott Servais, watching him do his thing behind the plate and all that, knowing that he was a candidate, but maybe not one of the finalists for this Twins job. But a guy who's been around the game forever and a day. Again, Midwest, bit of influence there coming from Wisconsin. So, there's a few different things about Servais that check boxes that people want from a manager. It's going to be more of a been there, done that, which the contrast with that and an offense or a roster that's going to be young, that can work. Teams hired guys like Jim Leland, Jack McKeon, because of their leadership, because of how long they've been around. Scott Servais is not going to run into a situation that he has not seen as a manager very often after 1,322 games. He's seen pretty much everything. Ryan Flaherty, on the other hand, that's going to be less true. And then there's differing levels for Rowson, who's older and has coached longer, but still hasn't managed. And then Shelton, who's managed for a while, but not particularly successfully. So again, it comes down to what the team decides is their number one prerogative when it comes to hiring a manager. And all of this is to say, this episode is based on what I know, what I believe I know, and understanding that there's very little that there's a whole lot that I still don't know. My preference would be Rowson, but I can see any one of these 4 being perfectly acceptable candidates. This is not a doom and gloom scenario, and it'll be painted that way in a lot of circles. So I'm not saying this just to be the positive voice in the room, but they each have they're pros, and I'm sure they each have their cons as well. Cons are probably more things we don't know, and people will pretend they know because they think that that's what the fans want to hear. But 4 very respectable candidates based on everything I've heard. And now I'm just eager to see how it all winds up, because I would assume, after the World Series or at some point near to that, the Twins will announce their manager, figure out their coaching staff. It'll be time to start signing guys, trading guys, and all that fun stuff. It's coming up real quick. Thank you, by the way, for making Locked On Twins your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, I'll make sure you're doing your second listen. The winter, but it's every game, every night until that World Series champion is crowned. Knock on wood, Toronto Blue Jays. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed and maybe got to know at least a little bit more about these managerial candidates. It's going to be a fun bit to see who they end up with, but Team Rowson over here, but all these are great choices. So thank you so much for hanging out. I'm Brandon Warne saying we'll catch you on the other side, or better yet, we'll see you tomorrow night.